You're welcome to Black Royalty Radio, episode 3. Shout out to everybody who watched episode 1 and 2. Super excited today to continue our conversations about education and really looking through a holistic lens that centers our voices, right? Today's guest, I have Dr. Tyrone Howard. Dr. Howard has done so much in the space of education that, by way of an introduction, you can take about a 30-second break while I read this. By way of an introduction, I'm going to read about the author's part from one of his latest books, All Students Must Thrive. Is this your latest?
One of
the latest. He's always working. Dr. Howard is a professor at the Graduate School of Education and Informational Studies at UCLA. Howard is also the inaugural director of the UCLA Pritzker Center for Strengthening Children and Families, a campus-wide consortium examining academic, mental health, and social emotional experiences and challenges for California's most vulnerable populations. He is also the former Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Howard's research examines culture, race, teaching, and learning. He has published over 75 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and technical reports. He has published several best-selling books, among them Why Race and Culture Matter in Schools, Black Mailed, Peril and Promise in the Education of African American Males. His most recent book, Expanding College Access for Urban Youth, documents ways that schools and colleges can create higher education opportunities for youth of color. Howard is also the director and founder of the Black Male Institute at UCLA, an interdisciplinary cadre. Oh, what a word. Of scholars, practitioners, community members, and policymakers dedicated to examining the nexus of race, class, and gender in relation to school-age youth. A native and former classroom teacher in Compton, California, Howard was named the recipient of the 2015 UCLA Distinguished Teaching Award, which is the university's highest honor for teaching excellence. In 2016, Howard was listed by Education Week as one of the 50 most influential scholars in the nation informing educational policy, practice, and reform. Welcome, Dr. Howard.
Thanks for having me. Good
Absolutely.
to be here.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. So with all of that goes into your introduction, and I had to read it because hearing it so many times, I was like, okay, okay, it's always more that he does. Through hearing you speak, it seems like you have this passion for the education and this work. How would you say, like, what your mission is? What are you on a mission to do?
Wow, I'm on a mission to try to make schools work for all kids, but let me just be unapologetically clear. I'm really specifically concerned about Black kids.
Absolutely.
And I say that because that is my experience. I grew up, I always tell folks I'm Tyrone from Compton, and I know how much talent, how much intellect, how much promise and potential resides in cities like Compton all across this country. But for a variety of reasons, it doesn't always work for some of our young people. And so my work and my commitment and my passion is fueled by the desire to see schools work for those who are most vulnerable. And I think Black children are among the most vulnerable students in schools today.
I love that. And so how did you get started in this work? Like, did you always want to be a teacher from day one growing up in Compton? What was that like?
I wish I could give you this story, Jacob, like, from the time I was 6 years old, I wanted to be a teacher. That's just not, I always say that the profession chose me.
Yeah.
I didn't choose the profession.
Yep.
Without making a long story too long, I really stumbled into teaching. I didn't know what I wanted to do after I finished my undergraduate degree. And I was trying to find ways to make some additional money. Substitute teaching became the entree to just kind of get my feet wet into teaching. I also had a good friend of mine she was teaching at the time and asked me to come out for a career day. And she was teaching third graders right here in Los Angeles. And I went to sit in on her class, and I was like, this is what I think I was put here to do. Yeah,
was it just because you enjoyed being around
I watched the way she was able to impact those young people, the way they responded to her, the joy, the excitement she created in that classroom, the proverbial light bulb going on above those young people's heads, the way she just really created magic in that space. And I'm like, this is what I think I want to do. Not knowing how difficult it was to get to that point, though, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
For sure. So when just framing that in your mind, right? When you're in that classroom and you're like, oh, this is something I could do. Was your student experience like that? Like, did you feel that magic as a student?
At points, yes. At points, no.
Okay.
I think for me, like lots of other young people, my schooling experiences were uneven in terms of the magic being there.
Yeah.
I had certain teachers, second grade, Miss Hill, fifth grade, Miss Kelly,
Yeah.
Seventh grade, Mr. Cormier. I can tell you those teachers who made the magic happen.
Yeah.
But I also can tell you those teachers who just really made it what do you call it? Just a painful process
Yeah.
where you tolerated school as opposed to really enjoying school.
Yeah, yeah, and that's such a balance that you have to strike. Yeah, I heard you name some of your teachers. One teacher I didn't hear you naming that was Miss Russell.
Yeah,
who you talk about often, and kind of the strictness that she ran her classroom with, and how it worked for her.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So how do you live through the experiences that you lived through, and then let that inform the perspective that you walk into a classroom with?
Yeah, so Miss Russell was one of my all-time favorite teachers, but she
Yeah.
was not your typical lovey-dovey, warm, and kind of,
Right.
a comforting type of teacher. And she's the kind of teacher that I think I learned to appreciate more the older I got.
Gotcha.
Because she was one of those old school, no nonsense, what now I refer to as warm demanders.
Yeah.
She expected excellence. She was going to push you to be excellent. She did not accept excuses.
Yep.
She felt like if you didn't learn, then I didn't teach it right. So I'm going to go back and teach it again and again and again. And so to me, that is the approach that I think that worked for me.
Yeah.
But I think what's so important to note is that what works for one student may not work for others.
For sure.
And I think what Miss Russell was, she was able to kind of be that armchair psychologist to recognize that what works for Tyrone is what's different than works for Jacob,
Right.
what's different that works for Alex,
Right.
that works for Adam, the whole 9 yards. So I
Yeah.
think part of what I tried to figure out as a teacher is how can you be able to read the room and see what each and every one of your students needs. And it changes not only from day to day, in
Yeah.
some cases it changes from hour to hour.
For sure, for sure. And I feel like that's a big thing for teachers to balance, because you have teachers who, I know what I'm doing on March 26th, hour 3, block 17 of this section. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a quiz the next week. It's going to be all the same thing. And just having that structure helps me plan it out. Then you have other teachers where, like, I walked down the hallway and saw this thing, and now I'm going to build a whole lesson off of it because it triggered something that I think is related to this. How do you counsel teachers who are new
Yeah.
to dealing with that balance and being able to go with a moment, deal with current events, but also stay with a schedule, stay with a routine, because there is value.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's one that I wish we talked more about with beginning teachers, because I think there is this real delicate, difficult balancing act that you have to really sort of, figure out. The idea that I think you need to have a structure, you need to have lesson unit plans of what you want to do over the course of a week, over the course of a day, and you want to have some degree of structure of what that's going to look like. But at the end of the day, you then quickly realize these are young people who have complex lives that don't just get checked at the door when they walk in.
Right.
And you have to be flexible. You have to be able to pick up on nuances of what's happening with your students.
Yeah.
You have to read nonverbals. You have to read facial expressions. You have to have check-in times. And you find at times that as much as you may plan and structure and put pieces in place, you get students who walk in where you have to say, you know what, today is not the day that we're going to get through A, B, and C, because I see we got to make some detours because some students need some time.
Right.
And I think leaders need to be able to tell teachers about that and help them to understand that, because you just never know what you're going to see with your young people from day to day.
Yeah. I've never taught in a public school system. You have. I think from my perspective, and one of the reasons why I don't teach in public school, I make a conscious decision, is I don't want people who are so far removed from my classroom to make decisions about what happens in my classroom, right? Like, if my head of school disagrees with something I do, at least that's a conversation I can go have with him in person, not some policymaker. And I know that for a lot of public schools, you have to submit plans for a unit. You have to submit a curriculum. You have to have certain deliverables that allow me to rank you as a teacher, more or less, right? So how do you navigate then can I take a moment and just kind of do a check-in? Like, can we talk about what's going on in the world today instead of doing what's in my lesson plan? How do I balance that with the fear of what's going to happen if I don't stick to this plan that I submitted?
That was one of the things that really was a real determining factor in my leaving the classroom, because I felt like so much of what I was told to do came from people who did not understand the day-to-day realities of what was going on in the classroom. So at the time I was teaching in Compton, we were under state receivership, which even intensified the level of oversight, micromanagement that was happening in classrooms.
What does state receivership mean?
So what happened was, at the time, Compton was really had been struggling academically and financially as a district.
Okay.
So receivership means that basically the state's going to take you over because you have shown little ability to be able to sort of keep your finances in order, because the district was in significant debt, and then B, the academic outcomes were deplorable, right? So when the state came in and took over, what happened was there was a state appointed administrator, and his job was this I never forget, the scripted curriculum that all teachers across the district were going to have to use. And the particulars of the scripted curriculum was that if you're a third grade teacher, all third grade teachers need to be on the same lesson, on the same day, same page at the same time. And it just felt like, we're not working with robots here. These are young people, and we had to keep doors open, and the doors had to be open, because at any point in time you could get the team from the state could walk into your classroom. And if I walk into your class and you're teaching third graders and I see you're on page 15, paragraph 2, then you got to walk in my class and I need to also be on page 15, paragraph 2. And if I'm not, then I'm being looked at as if I'm somehow not doing my job well. Now, never mind the fact that I had 3 of my kids who walked in this morning, 2 of them who are currently, experiencing homelessness, and they were hungry, and one is having a meltdown, and another one is got something else going on. There's no consideration of those factors. It's that you got to be on pace at the same time. And I just felt like you can't do education that way when you expect folks to be in this lockstep fashion as if all the kids are all the same. That's just not realistic.
There are 2 directions I'm going to go with that, and I'm going to put a pin in it so I remember to go the other way. One as a student and one as a teacher, right? On the student side, I hear you tell stories and stories about these just horrific things that are going on in these kids' lives when they show up in our classrooms sometimes, and how there's just so much that you don't even know about that they might be dealing with that is directly impacting their production in your eyes in their class. Is there a standard that exists that accurately represents the student that is in front of us? Because what I'm hearing you say about the state taking over a school and all these things, there's a standard that is put in place and enforced just across the board. Even the SAT is a standard that is in place and just enforced kind of blanketly across the board. And we know that so much goes into it and so much impacts that score that has nothing to do with how I sit down and take the test. And at UCLA, you're not just letting people in with a good story.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. That's
so
right.
Is there a standard that you're thinking of, or that you would reimagine, that actually represents the students that we have in front of us?
Yeah, I think another excellent question. I think part of our challenge is that we still do schooling with a 19th century framing. And that 19th century framing is really rooted in this idea of treating all students the same, more or less. Line up in rows, sit down, raise your hand, don't speak unless spoken to. This is how you respond. This is how you think. This is how you comprehend. And it's all about, in many ways, control. It's all about the ability to kind of have folks socialize in a particular way. And I think we have got to recognize that uniformity is not who we are. Now, we can have some general concepts and ideas of what we want students to learn, but there needs to be tremendous malleability, flexibility in how we expect or how we want students to show their degrees of competence or their degrees of success. The challenge in that, though, is that it's hard in a complex system where you are serving millions of students, millions of students in the country, to say we're going to have 50 million different standards of what success is, or 50 million standards of what competency is. So I think this is where we've got to be creative and give teachers and schools more autonomy, much like you see in more of our our private schools, or even in some of our Montessori schools, that says that I know where Jacob is when he came here, and Jacob is much more artistic thinker, more of a universal thinker, and so we're going to begin to see how his standard might be here. But then you got to look at Tyrone. Tyrone's a much more field dependent thinker, where he needs to see things in a much more linear fashion. So his degree of success will be someplace a little bit different. Doesn't mean one is good. Doesn't mean when it's bad.
Yeah.
It just recognizes what works for me and works for you.
Okay.
The challenge with that is it puts a lot of pressure on teachers.
Right.
Because then teachers have to figure out, if I'm a middle school teacher and I've got 120 students over the course of a day, how do I then map out that individualized approach for 120 students?
Yep.
That's a hard thing to do.
Very hard thing to do. And then you have teachers who have to fill out these comments for individualized. And it's always such a tricky thing to walk through. And so I'm thinking of, like, if the standard has to be unique for the student and what they're going through, how do you compare those two?
Yeah. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
Because no two children are alike at the end of the day, right?
Right, absolutely.
And so I think the hard part is saying maybe we begin to look at standards with a lot of flexibility in them, or we look at bands, or we look at portfolios that give a lot more sort of wiggle room in terms of how students are able to show what they know, taking into account where students are when they show up to us every single day.
Sure.
And that's my big take. I think that more teachers need to take time to understand who students are, what they've been through, because that's going to shape how they show up in classrooms.
For sure. Okay. So from the student perspective, it means one thing. From a teacher perspective, when I'm hearing the state coming over and taking over schools and the standards in that nature, I'm thinking about the power dynamic that exists in classrooms. And I heard you tell one story in particular about a student named DeAndre. And DeAndre is in class, in English class, and we're going around, we're reading. DeAndre doesn't want to read. Teacher gets into a back and forth with DeAndre. Read. No. Read. No. There's a power dynamic that exists in class. There's a power dynamic that I kind of depend on as a teacher, because, like, I don't want to fight every time I tell you what we're going to do, right? I'm putting out this plan so that you can learn these things, hit these objectives. This is why I'm here, to serve you, right? How do new teachers come into that dynamic? And then I'll let you answer that question first, and then I'll add some more spice onto it. So how do teachers navigate that power dynamic that they walk into as young teachers?
Man, you got some great questions today, right? No, I think so much of it is recognizing that if you are trying to make power a part of what you do, you're already losing the battle, because you are not going to control kids. Some kids just refuse to be controlled, and I think for beginning teachers, that's one of the big things that we get taught. Explicitly and implicitly. Control your classroom. Control your students. Control the environment. And so you're thinking, I got to control this thing. And so you come in thinking you've got to be dictatorial, or you've got to be the enforcer. And that may work for some students, but there's always students who feel like, you're not going to tell me how to show up in this place.
Right.
You're not going to tell me how I can think and act and communicate.
Right.
And oftentimes it's 1, 2, 5 of those students who can make life incredibly difficult for teachers. We've all had them, right? I would say to beginning teachers, which I say all the time now, you've got to think about how you can build relationships with students.
Absolutely.
You can't come in as drill sergeant, because that may backfire. Though I think you need to be firm, fair, and consistent.
Right.
Let me be clear. Firm, fair, and consistent. But you've got to be firm, fair, and consistent as you attempt to build relationships and establish rapport with those students in that classroom. Because if you come in with the heavy hand, it may very well backfire on you. Because some students will go out of their way to ensure that you don't get the power. That's right. Make it their mission. I always say this, some students say, not only will I not learn from you, but I will sabotage this entire class so nobody learns from you, because you think that you are somehow judge and jury of this entire environment, and you're not.
Right. And that's how you lose power in the situation.
Bingo.
So the Miss Russells of the world, they get to, she did hold that standard. She did. She was that enforcer. But was it something in the way that she did it? Was it the relationship that she had with the students that allowed her to do it, or was it just a different time?
I think it's a different time. I think there was a time where young people were much more in line with compliance, because there was consequences at home if you weren't compliant. And I'm not saying that there aren't consequences today.
For sure.
I just think it was a different time. Miss Russell, there was no issue with Miss Russell picking up the phone and calling home and saying, look, Tyrone didn't turn in his homework today, and then I had to be accountable to my mother and father about why I didn't, right? Those times have changed. They have. And it pained me that they have, but they have.
No, and you know what? I'm not even against you, but I'm thinking of when you keep playing with this perspective shift from student to teacher, right? Teachers who walk into, and I reflect on my story all the time, because I wasn't technically trained. Like I picked up things because I was perceptive, but I wasn't technically trained in how to hold a classroom, how to run a classroom.
Yep.
And so I'm doing it off of the perspective that I have off of my teachers. What did my teachers do that I liked? What did they do that I didn't like? Okay, how can I replicate and reproduce?
That's right.
I'm also shamelessly stealing from other teachers that I see. My first year, I remember I would sit in man's name was Mr. Hanford. I would sit in Mr. Hanford's class, see how he taught to his class, and then go try to rinse and repeat. But I learned that it doesn't always work.
That's right.
It don't sound the same coming from me as it does from him. My jokes don't land the same way because you have to set up that environment.
That's right.
And for so many teachers, it's just like, okay, I got to figure it out,
Yep.
right? And I'm interested in that power dynamic because the power dynamic is always present. And if I'm thinking as a new teacher and I'm thinking of what a teacher is, I almost romanticize the time. And you can hear teachers sometimes in break room laugh about this. You know, we used to have rulers and we could fix this thing real quick, right? We have these dreams of the standard that used to exist.
That's right.
That made things kind of easier to enforce the things that we want to see. Because going forward, dealing with a student who has this self-advocacy, right? It's a lot harder it's a lot more difficult of a conversation to have of, you need to do this because of this. We can't give busy work anymore because now they know, right? The gig is up. So as teachers are coming into this new 2022 reality, where students who have a perspective that is more developed than I think it's ever been, right?
Agreed.
How do they manage being on the cutting edge of things and doing things a new way versus sticking to the ways that we've always done things and the lessons that we've learned from the past?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is we have to recognize that the way that we've always done things may not always have been the effective way to do things.
Yeah.
And that maybe many of the things we did in the past need to be let go because we're educating in a different time, different students, different contexts with different outcomes. And I think sometimes our holding on to how things were becomes part of the problem. I think sometimes, and I have to check myself on this idea that this is how I learned, and so I'm going to teach my kids the same way is sometimes part of the problem. We are talking in this moment about young people who are digital natives. Technology alone is a game changer because we didn't grow up in that context, right? My son, my youngest son, who's 23, has a hard time understanding how we lived in a world where there was no internet. He's like, how did you all get information? How did you know anything? He just can't fathom that. So again, we're using this 20th century model for young people today in 2022, and the dynamics are so night and day.
For sure.
So I always think that in many ways, we need to have teachers, younger teachers, who are willing to lean into their realities because their realities are much more in line with our students' realities compared to folks who've been in this work for 20, 30 years, right? And I don't want to discount what those more seasoned teachers know, but oftentimes I think where some of the beginning teachers struggle is there's this desire to somehow say, I want these students to be my friends. If they can be my friends, we can connect. And I think where the more seasoned teachers come into play, say, that's not your job to be their friends. Your job is to kind of create an environment that allows them to understand the line of respect that exists between you as a teacher and them as a student, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Friendship is not what we're doing here. Teaching and learning should be our golden objective. So that's where the seasoned teachers can come into play. But I think our younger teachers have a much greater proficiency with technology, a much greater proficiency with accessing social media, using current events in ways that help students kind of sort of be brought into the learning. So at some point in time, there's a lot that our seasoned teachers can learn from our novice teachers and vice versa. The challenge in this, though, is that we have to do a better job in how we prepare teachers. We do, because the models are just not what is needed in this current moment. I could talk a lot about that because so much of what you just said, Jacob, I can relate to. I went through a traditional teacher education program, and there was so much I didn't get. And I think teaching is one of those jobs that you learn better and best by doing.
Yep. Absolutely. Full agreement. I'm interested in how we develop teachers to have those relationships. And when you said new teachers look for students to be their friends and more veteran seasoned teachers know friendship isn't the objective, I feel like I'm on that turning point, right? Because again, when you're in that learning as you do it, you're in survival mode,
Absolutely.
right? You're in, oh my God, how am I going to get to tomorrow? Right? How am I going to
How do I get through the next half an hour?
What is about,
Right,
I'm sure this
right.
happened to you. You ever write a lesson plan and
Absolutely.
get through it in
Yep.
5 minutes and
Yep,
don't know
like,
what's happening?
I got another hour left. I have nothing left to give.
And so you're figuring this thing out as you go, and it does come down to, okay, what can I do naturally?
Yep.
Well, naturally, I can make this room of people my friend, right? On just a person-to-person level.
Yep.
We can have a conversation. But that, because if I prioritize friendship, then I lose the standards, right? If I prioritize the standards, friendship will come.
That's right. That's
right?
right.
Or it won't.
That's right.
Some of my students don't love me by the end of class, and that happens.
Yep.
But it's this kind of tug and pull, right? So it almost sounds like newer teachers. Are they ready for their own classroom as soon as they go into it?
They're not.
And is that just okay?
and we have to do better with helping them to make that transition, because every beginning teacher will tell you that the first year is you're right on. You hit the nose right. It's survival. It's hard. It's very hard. Yep. But I think there's a 4-phase process that most teachers have to go through. And I looked at this when I think about my time with Miss Russell. Miss Russell started off, and she was okay being strongly disliked.
Yep.
She was not trying to be our friends. She was not trying to be, smiley, lovey-dovey with us. Right. She started off being strongly disliked because she wanted to establish a continuum of respect. But that strong dislike ultimately turned into what I call grudging respect. Okay. Where after a while, we as students, we start off not liking her, but we kind of grudgingly start to respect her because we knew she was about the business. If you didn't show up right, she was going to let you know. Yep. That grudging respect ultimately turned into genuine respect, where we realized, you know what, something's happening here with us as learners that didn't happen in 4th grade, in 3rd grade. We're seeing students who are now thriving and getting recognized with awards and accomplishments. We're seeing students that we knew couldn't read 2 years ago now are reading now. So we knew something was happening here. Awesome. So that 3rd phase is this genuine respect. And then the 4th phase is sincere admiration. By the end of my 5th grade year with Miss Russell could have told us to all line up and go jump in the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. We'd have been fighting to see who would have done it first, because we believe if she said it, it was what was best for us. Yeah. But she was willing to go through that stage of being strongly disliked because she knew she would ultimately get us to that point of sincere admiration. Most beginning teachers don't want to be at that place of being sincerely disliked at the beginning in order to get to that place of being, truly admired. And so we have to talk to teachers about, look, you're about establishing some parameters, creating an environment that some of your students may not like in the beginning, but you have to know what the end game is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mother used to always say, people who love you correct you.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so if you're not willing to hold them to that standard, then you're ultimately not doing what you're saying that you're doing to get their friendship. Right. I'm fascinated by this whole conversation, but I also want to bring in kind of explicitly how this sits in a racial context.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because the two conversations that we just had about teacher relationships and then framing this system that always has been, or not always has been, but has been for so long versus what it should be on the other end. One of the things I said at the beginning of this year was that I feel like this is the most important year of education, period. Because the past 2 years of pandemic reality and everybody going remote made us disassociate ourselves from the narrative of things that we just have to do. There's nothing we just have to do anymore, right? And so I'm interested in shifting this conversation to the lessons that we get from the pandemic. But also, before we get there, like, how much of what the system is working exactly as it was supposed to work? Yeah, right. Yeah. Is the system broken, or is it just working like it's supposed to work, and we just don't like it?
Yeah, there are those who believe that the system is working just as it was designed, that it was never designed to give everybody opportunity to succeed. But you have to create this myth that somehow you do have a reality where you can be successful. And if you don't reach standards of success, it's not the system's fault. Right. It's your fault because you didn't apply yourself. You didn't make the proper sacrifice. You didn't put forth the effort, right? There are folks who believe that at the end of the day, there's a reason why kids who go to working class schools end up in working class jobs. There's a reason why kids who go to middle class schools end up with middle class jobs. And there's a reason why, young kids who go to elite schools end up with elite jobs and run corporations, et cetera, et cetera. Right. There's something to be said for that school of thought, which I think is valid on lots of levels. But I'm I am the naive optimist. I have to believe that we can disrupt those systems.
For sure.
I think that I am an example of disruption of the system. I think that you are an example of disruption of the system. Now, some people would say that we're still pawns in the game because you need to have someone from Bed-Stuy, you need to have someone from Compton who has some degrees of success to tell the masses, see, this system is not broken because they made it. You just have to be more like them.
Right.
But I think that you can be a product of the system, but not buy into the system. And I think when you see black men going in to teach, trying to help to disrupt that system, that's where you start to cause indigestion in the system, where you start to say, how does it begin to change itself? So I think if you're in education, you do it because you believe that it can be something different than what it has been historically.
Yeah, I love that. And I love to hear you talk about that optimism. Black men are less than 2% of the teaching population. We're an endangered species up here, right?
Yes, we are, they say.
What do black men need, or you can approach this question from either way. What do black men need to encourage them to come to the classroom? Or what is it about the experience of being a black man that lends you towards being a better educator?
Yeah, so, the challenge on the first part of that question is that for lots of black men, teaching is not even a thought.
Yeah.
Because schools were not pleasant experiences when we were children.
Yep.
So for a lot of black men, I've had this conversation countless times trying to get young black men to think about teaching as careers. And they're like, why would I go back to that place that I despised, that I could not stand, that I hated because it was so oppressive and so sort of degrading? Why would I go back to that place? Yeah. I oftentimes flip that on its head and say that's the very reason why you should go into it, because there's a generation of young people who need somebody who is willing to be different, who is daring to be more creative and innovative in their teaching. That's why you should go back into it, because we don't want to see another generation of young people who feel like they succeeded not because of schools, but in spite of schools. Yeah. So I think we've got to begin to talk to young black men about the fact that they can make a difference. There's all kind of research that's coming out now showing that for young black students who have just one black male teacher, just one, it significantly increases their likelihood of graduating from high school, going to college. So we make a difference. The question is, what is it that we do that perhaps others don't do? And that's a much larger conversation.
What do we do that others don't do?
Yeah, I think we do the same things for black kids that white teachers have done for white kids all the time. Yep. We believe in our kids. We hold them to a high standard. We're not going to accept anything less than their personal best. We see ourselves in them. We see our families and their families. We essentially see them as an extension of us. And that's what white children have gotten from white teachers for a long time.
I think it comes down to expectations. Like, what do you expect of the students that are sitting in front of you?
That's right.
And I've heard you say this in your talks where you say, if you don't believe poor kids can learn, then like we can hold on a second. You can leave. I feel like for so long it was such an acceptable thing, and even now, right? And this is going to get me to one of my. I can't wait to ask you this question. Even now, you'll hear teachers talk about their whiteness as something that they're apologetic for, something that, yes, I'm sorry, there are certain things I just won't understand, right? And so it allows in their mind to exist this kind of unaddressed expectation that they might have, right? And so that student in my class, I don't expect them to do well.
That's right. That's right.
And so in 2022, it looks one way, but let's flash back however many years you liked within the educational system. When the Little Rock 9 are going into class, right, their teachers have a very explicit expectation for what they can and cannot do. And students throughout history have gone through classrooms where their teacher is like, hey, you're not smart enough to do it, right? Unless you're in the athletic field, which is a different conversation. And we'll get to that in a second. But for so many of those students, I feel like it fundamentally shifted us backwards into our production, right? Is that what you would call the achievement gap?
Yeah, so I think the achievement gap is structural and it's ideological.
Okay.
And when I say structural, it's tied to the fact that we have this history in this country of denying black folk political opportunities, economic opportunities, educational opportunities, lower funded schools, lack of investment in neighborhoods where black folks are, redlining, not allowing black folks to have access to wealth.
Yep.
All those things that are structural that put us in a really distinct disadvantage, just historically, right? But then there's also an ideological gap, and that ideological gap is what you just spoke about, is this belief that they're just not capable.
Yeah.
They're just not as good enough. And I think it really dates back to when you started to look at the integration of schools.
Yeah.
Because even as we were in segregated schools, the belief was that those were inferior schools, the black schools, right?
Yeah.
They were not inferior in spirit and belief. They were inferior in terms of investments. They were inferior in terms of structures and supports. But we had teachers and principals who saw the best in us.
Yeah.
And as you saw schools beginning to be integrated, we saw for the first time in our country's history, black children being set in classes with white teachers, who many of whom did not want black children in their schools.
Yeah.
And B, and this is the real damaging part, just did not see the intellectual capability and potential of black children.
Right.
As much as they may have smiled and
Right.
said, I believe in you,
Right.
and I guess I have to teach you here, there's just fundamental belief. And most children can pick up on it when you just don't see the best in me.
Right.
When you're just willing to just engage in apathetic approaches to not even challenge me to be better. It's that low expectations that I think has permeated for decades when it comes to schools. We call it anti-blackness now, but that has been in place forever when you started to have black students in schools with non-black teachers who did not want them there and did not believe in their potential to learn.
Yep. And you talk about the importance of teachers to be anti-racist and not passive in anything. You bring up Bayard Rustin, you bring up James Baldwin's letter to teachers. What advice do you give, or what experience have you had with all teachers, particularly white teachers who have figured something out and can approach this thing better? Because there are teachers out there who are doing an excellent job and who are moving work forward and who are bringing things into their classroom in ways that hasn't been done.
That's right. So I'm always clear when I talk about anti-racism or anti-blackness, to me, it's a mentality and an ideology, not a skin color.
Yeah.
And by that, what I'm getting at is that it pains me to say, but I've seen it. There can be black teachers, and there are black teachers who engage in anti-blackness with black students. There are black teachers who do some destructive things to black children.
Sure.
At the same time, there are some white teachers who do some phenomenal work working with black students.
Yeah.
And so this is where I say it's a mentality. It's not a skin color. But I think to those teachers who are white who do some phenomenal things with black students, they are able to see themselves for who they are. They recognize their limitations. They know where their blinders are. But at the same time, they're not going to allow those blinders to not put them in positions where they can say, there are some things I can learn from these students just as much as they can learn from me.
Yeah.
They learn about students. They talk to students. They read. They have conversations. They begin to see the promise and potential of of black children in ways that they might not otherwise. It requires what I call a cultural humility. Let me step back and recognize that the ways I see the world, the ways I grew up, the ways my cultural sort of values played out aren't the same as my students. And it doesn't make mine better and theirs worse. It just makes them different.
Right.
And I'm going to have to be able to humble myself to be learned, informed by their experiences, and then use that as a conduit to help me think about how to teach them. That to me is the essence of what really good teaching is, whether you white, black, red, green, or blue.
Yeah. And so that seems like culturally responsive teaching to me, right? Just responding to what's in your room and going off of the literal people that are there. But culturally responsive teaching also brings up to me another CRT in my mind of what critical race theory is. When I'm thinking of how I'm like this kind of perfect world, this perfect classroom where I can be culturally responsive, bring everybody's identities into the room, it's slightly different than what my reality is in an American classroom. I feel a certain not pressure, not weight, but a certain responsibility in my American classroom to bring up certain American realities and talk about what is fundamentally the American ideal, especially in as much as I'm an English teacher, right? So when I read certain canonical English texts, I read it through a lens that has been informed by my years of blackness. And it fundamentally changes. And so when I hear a critical race kind of theory, the whole thing is kind of trash to me, right? I also always make people define it before they tell me. So I'm interested in your definition of it, and then your commentary on how do we handle that in America that is trying to ban these conversations from our room.
Yeah. So, one of the things we say we want with our young people is criticality. We want our kids to be critical thinkers. We want them to be able to not accept information at the surface level, but to be able to dissect and analyze and identify secondary sources, primary sources, and come to their own understanding. And I think that's great because we don't want kids who just regurgitate facts for the sake of knowing facts, right? So the part I find intriguing is at the very time we say we don't want criticality, yet we're then very afraid of what critical race theory is. So if we want criticality and you've got theories about race that ask us to have a certain degree of criticality, why don't we want there to be some discussion, thought processing about how race plays itself out in this country today and historically, right? So I feel like the whole conversation, all the uproar around critical race theory is misguided by lots of misinformation. Critical race theory is a theory that's been discussed for over 50 years, primarily in law schools across this country, looking at the role that racism has played and how the law has been played out in this country. Folks like Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, Derek Bell, early thinkers who were raising these questions about the fairness and justice of the law when you think about sort of the ways in which people of color have been not always treated fairly under the law. I don't know a single teacher, not a one, who teaches critical race theory in their class. I've been asking for folks, give me a lesson, give me an assignment, give me a homework, give me something that shows me where it's been taught. But I do think there's a danger. I think what people are speaking about is this desire to not have real critical conversations around the role that race and racism have played in our country. So for you as an English teacher, if you're teaching some of these canonical texts, let's say you're reading Pride and Prejudice, right? Okay, I think the critical question says, if you're looking at 19th century England, where are the black people at this point in time? Where are the other non-white folks at this time? If you're reading, A Catcher in the Rye, you're asking questions about whose voices and stories are being told, who's invisible, who's being left out. I think that's the kind of critical thinking that we say we want our students to have. So I think in any subject matter, especially one like English, the text that you read should raise a number of questions about what's the author's perspective, how do we decide who's here, who's not here, whose voices are heard, whose stories are being told. Are these stories different if they were in a different time, different place, different setting with different people? That's the kind of criticality that I think we want all of our students to have. But the bottom line is this. We just don't want our young people to have real, honest conversations about how race and racism have been staples in this country since its inception. So therefore, let's just erase it. Let's not talk about it. Let's act as if it's a thing of the past. Let's all be colorblind and let's move forward. And that's the real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the programs that you've seen in schools that are addressing this well?
So I've got a colleague, Ernest Morrell and Jeff Shear. They've talked about critical media literacy. And how do we use core sets of questions for everything that we engage in to begin to ask, how do we know it's true? How do we begin to digest it, right? So I've seen some schools who have used critical media literacy to dissect English texts, history texts, social studies texts, to say, okay, how do we begin to understand, is this one perspective? What are multiple perspectives? I mean, you even see these books that come out at the primary grades. There's a great book I used to read to my second graders a long time ago called what's it called? The Real Story of the Three Little Pigs.
And
it's told from the wolf's perspective. And so it's that kind of critical sort of thinking that says, okay, we get told stories from a perspective when there are multiple perspectives oftentimes involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay. I like to break up the interview a little bit. I have a uncategorized category of questions, right? Some of them are fun. Some of them are just quick hitters.
Let's do it.
And they range all over the place. Here's the first one. Spades or chess?
Chess.
Excellent answer. Public or private school?
Public.
Why?
That's why I am.
Fair enough. Boys in the Hood or Friday?
Woo, Boys in the Hood.
Ooh, okay. Tell me about the idea of the talented 10th versus the neglected 90th. I heard you touch on it, but I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you to expound on it a little bit, just for my own understanding.
Yes, so I think the talented 10th, as Du Bois laid it out, in theory, makes tremendous amounts of sense, but it's talked about within a context that is tied to segregated communities and segregated neighborhoods. And I think that this idea of talented 10th oftentimes reinforces this deficit-based account that says that the neglected 90th can't do things on their own, or don't have the agency to transform their outcomes and circumstances, or lack the wherewithal to be able to be self-motivated, self-governed. So I think it requires some complication now, given the fact that the talented 10th oftentimes has abandoned the very communities in which they come from, and the neglected 90th that are part of it.
Glad I asked. Do we need to reconsider the texts that we have and the textbooks that we have, or do we need to get rid of textbooks and certain canonical texts in general?
Both. I think we need to get rid of some, but I think we also can do a better job of teaching our young people to be literary critics, where they analyze, dissect, and really take apart what they are asked to read.
Okay. Do you have a top 5 rappers all time?
Oh, come on, man. Yes, I do. In any particular order, or from
Any particular order?
Okay, so one, I'm gonna go with Rakim is always number one on my list.
Okay.
Biggie.
Yep.
I gotta go Ice Cube.
Yeah.
I gotta go Jay-Z.
Love that.
And I go
It's always hard to set the fifth slot.
Eminem.
Okay. Didn't see it coming, but I love it. Tell me what you think of Teach for America.
My attitude has shifted. If you
Okay.
talked to me 10 years ago, I was very anti Teach for America. I've come to a different place now after seeing, watching, and interacting with folks who are products of Teach for America.
I love that. I love that growth. That's
Yep.
good modeling that I needed to see. Is college worth it?
It depends
Okay.
on how much worth you're talking about. It's not worth it if you got to go into 6-figure debt to get a BA degree. It's not.
Yeah. On the same note, do we need to reconsider our attitude towards community colleges?
Absolutely.
Okay. How so?
Absolutely. I think community colleges are the unsung entities of our country, and they don't get the kind of recognition and prestige that they deserve and need. Some of the most influential minds in our country are products of community colleges, and I don't think we lift them up to the degree that we should, and that needs to change.
I love that. HBCUs or PWIs?
Ooh, so I'm a product of a PWI. One of my sons is a product of HBCU. I'm gonna say HBCs.
Okay. What do HBCUs offer that students really need?
Sense of belonging.
Okay.
A sense of care.
Yeah.
A sense of connection.
Okay. The last two. What advice do you offer to students of color?
Never apologize for being who you are.
Love that. And what's something that teachers need to learn the hard way?
It's not about you.
That's excellent. Absolutely. So I think it's not about us, and at the same time, we need to do that self work that is necessary so that we can come through the experiences that we've had and not merely be a reflection of them, but be the production of them, right? So process whatever you got to process, so that when you get to the front of your classroom, you can do the thing.
That's right.
Right.
So in some ways, maybe I would hedge my comment. It's not about you, but then it is about you.
Right.
And I think what you just said is the it's about you part, because that's that internal work that we all have to do.
Absolutely.
To realize it's not about us.
Absolutely. And I think the system of education that is present for us in America puts us at a certain disadvantage in that it wasn't created for our success. Right.
Bingo.
Just kind of fundamentally.
Agreed.
And so I think because you're an educator who has lived through that, and then to come out on the other side and fill that gap and say to yourself, okay, now I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen for the spheres of influence that I can control, right? For the students that I feel like that makes you royalty. Right?
Yeah. So, but the challenge in this is, though, we have to make sure that we don't lose our minds in the process of attaining education.
So true.
Because so much of what happens, and you know this, Jacob, is that when you become the exception, you are given praise and rewards and affirmations, and if you're not careful, you can become intoxicated with the belief that they accept me as one of their own, or I'm in the club, or I'm better, or I'm not one of them. And that's the problem with so many of us who get these degrees, that we somehow feel like we have done something better
Right.
than those who are not here.
Right.
And I always think about, what my grandmother would say, but by the grace of God, there go I. Slightest twist of fate, and I could be where they are and vice versa.
Amen. I wore this shirt today just to have this conversation with you because I feel like there's a massive shout out that needs to happen to all hoods everywhere.
Come on now.
Right? Because the ingenuity and the things that black men have done to survive, right or wrong, throw it out the window, but to survive needs to be applauded.
Absolutely.
Right? And I heard you say one time in one of your speeches, I shouldn't be here.
That's
like,
right.
I'm lucky to even be on this stage talking to you because one decision could have took me left.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I saw that friend go that way, and it happened the way it happened. But there's an element of luck. There's an element of opportunistic, right? For me, I know a lot of that drive came from student athlete, from being an athlete, right? There were so many decisions that I was like, I could do that, but I got to go to practice.
That's right.
I can't do that because I got to go to practice tomorrow. And football is going to be what gets me from where I am now to where I want to be. I know you had basketball for a really long time, and then you had a intense conversation that kind of shifted your perspective on basketball. Can you tell me what that shift was like for you?
Wow, we could have a long conversation about sport, and I'm always thinking about this dynamic between sports and black men. I think it's a gift and a curse. I think it does lots of beautiful things for us. It teaches us lifelong lessons, but I think if you're not careful, it can send you down a real dark and oftentimes unforgiving path. For me, it came to fruition when I was in college, and I had a professor who's now president of Cal State Dominguez Hills, Thomas Parham. Thomas Parham was the guy who pulled me aside and said, listen, because I walked on and I'm not on scholarship and I'm investing lots of hours in basketball practice, basketball training, basketball film, all the things that come with it, at the expense of my own academic performance. Not getting playing time, which was foreign to me, right? But thinking that if I kept working hard, kept putting more time in, it was going to manifest. But sometimes you're so deep in the forest you can't see the trees, and you need somebody who can help pull you out the forest and say, "Look, this is not going to end up the way you want to." And Professor Parham was the person who did that for me. He said, "Listen, you have too much promise and too much potential academically to be putting all your time in this when this is not going to yield the kinds of things that you can." And it's hard to hear, and it's painful to wrap your head around because sports have been so much a part of my life. And if I can go one step further, sports was such a part of my identity, how I define myself, right? Because being a black male who exceeds at sports brings you a ton of accolades, right? It keeps the gangs from messing with you. It gives you lots of attention from lots of people, right? So you're basically saying that my identity, I need to redefine it. What does that mean? That the passion that I've had for most of my life, you need to set it on the shelf. How do I do that, right? But I think what real powerful mentors do, they tell you the truth even though you may not want to hear it. And they don't just tell you the truth like you don't need to do this, but what Dr. Parham did, he said, you need to stop doing this and let me tell you what you should be doing. And let me offer you some pathways of what you should consider exploring. That was a game changer for me. And I try to do the same thing with the students I work with at UCLA now, is that, look, sports are great, but at some point the air is out the ball. You don't have the speed or the athleticism you want. What's your plan then? And sometimes that conversation needs to happen with some folks sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. I think when I think of the 2% statistic, I think student athletes are the answer to that, because when you look at the percentage of black men in athletics, those numbers are pretty high. That's a representative sample for you, right?
Exactly.
But then you think of, okay, how many of those collegiate athletes make it to the professional level that they want to be in? What are you talking about, like 1% of them? Less than that. And so what happens to the 99% of college athletes who have been pushed through the education system off of their strength of their athletic performance?
That's right. Yeah.
What happens to them, and where do they go, and what kind of mental health realities are exposed once you strip me of my identity?
That's right.
And send me out into a world that I wasn't prepared for.
That's the pathway I said that's oftentimes unforgiving, because it can be really hard, because for a lot of young men, it's a real it's a real case of arrested development.
Yeah.
Because you have young men who have not thought about career exploration. They've not thought about what are my passions. They've not thought about what jobs I've had that I might want to pursue long. They've not given thought about what major might be a connection to what I want to do.
Right.
Entrepreneurial opportunities, all those things that lots of 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old college students are thinking about for those 4 years of college.
Yeah.
Many, not all, but many student athletes, especially black men, are not having those conversations. They're not in the spaces. So like I said, it's arrested development.
Yeah.
It's that developmental trajectory that's basically been on pause.
Right.
And it's just starting at 21, 22, 23.
Right.
And I think many figured out, but it's just a delayed process, and it should not have to be.
Yeah. So how would you reimagine how we introduce athletics to our students? Because it's a double-edged sword, like most things, because I shouldn't form this identity around my performance, but at the same time, like, that's why I'm in school. That's what made me go back so many times.
Yeah, I have these conversations with my son all the time, who's, like I told you, a middle school teacher, or a high school teacher in Texas, and he always says that, look, if I didn't have athletics, some of my students would not even show up at school.
Yep.
The sport is what keeps them going.
Yep.
Sport is what keeps them trying to keep their grades at a certain level. So I get the value. I get the importance. We just have to figure out what is it that sport does that academics don't for our young black men. And part of it is success.
Yeah.
So I have success in sport. I'm going to keep doing it because with success comes affirmation and recognition.
Yeah.
What is it that we have to do so that young people get the same type of success on the academic domain?
Yeah.
That they get the same kind of affirmation when they do well on that English exam.
Right.
I'm always intrigued. I say this all the time, that I watch that, young children, like, 50, like 5, 6, 7 years old, when they've got soccer games or football games, everybody comes out in the family, right? Mom, dad, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, and we cheer and we root and that's my baby, that's my child. And that tells the child, like, wow, these people, when I'm doing this thing, they all come out and they cheer for me and they say my name and they lift me up and I get all kinds of attention. But then when I'm over here in this place called the classroom, I don't get everybody that shows up for that, right? How do we transfer some of that in the same way? And I think that's where we have to be creative. I've always said this. I'm intrigued by National Signing Day. Because National Signing Day, we have these young men who are, let's say if they're going to college to play football, they bring the family out. They got the hats right here. They got ESPN, and person so and so is going to tell us, where he's going to college, and everybody's on pins and needles, and this person has the 3 hats, right? I've oftentimes said, what if we did that for the student who's the non-student athlete? What if we took the young man who is deciding between MIT, Harvard, and Caltech, and we have just as much, excitement, around that to say, okay, because this young man may be the person who comes up with a new expansion on the theory of relativity.
So true.
So why can't we put the same kind of, like you said, pomp and circumstance around academic accomplishments as we do athletics?
Yeah. I don't know if we'll ever get there.
I gotta be a wild dreamer. we gotta put it out there, and I hope we could. I may not ever see it, but we have to at least put it out in the universe.
Sports to me feels like a true meritocracy in a way that the classroom isn't. Like, because of all the things that goes into what my grade will ultimately become. We didn't even talk about grading. But grading is a whole thing, right?
It is.
Talk about relationships and expectations. A lot of that has to do with the grade that I'm going to give you.
That's
like,
right.
how much work do I feel like you put into this? Kind of affects the grade that you get.
Yeah.
All that to say, sports is like this equal playing field where everybody can see I'm better at this thing than you. And my coach is going to praise me for being better at this thing than you. Can I put the ball in the basket or not?
But you talk to some folks who aren't playing. They will say it's not a meritocracy because I'm better than that dude who's the starting wide receiver. The coach just doesn't see it.
True.
I think I could run better routes than him. I think I've got better footwork. So there's this competitive nature for those who are not playing that says I should be out there.
That's also true. But there's also that's one level away that you go to.
Yeah. That's true.
If it's not my performance, it's the coach's attitude.
That's right. Exactly.
In the classroom, it could be any number of
things.
That's right.
No, I agree.
Right? That list doesn't end. And I think that framing allows, in particular for Black men, right, a way forward, right, a path towards success, as you said. that ultimately will exploit them.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's right. That's right. But see, again, I think some teachers figure out how to create a healthy, friendly, caring, competitive spirit within the context of classrooms.
Yeah.
Where I feel like if I do well here, or if I just show effort and show progress and show improvement, that's going to be recognized and affirmed and lifted up in ways that are going to benefit me in other ways, right? In ways that, we see on the athletic domain. I think the harder conversation that we have to have with young black men is that, look, if you pursue this thing called sport, the chances are so against you getting to that level you think you're going to get, that you're giving up something in the process. And what is the thing you're giving up in the process that's about your mental growth, your emotional development, your intellectual enhancement. And we have to help young people understand that you can't let sports or even institutions of higher education take that away from you for their benefit and for your detriment. And that's what happens I see it happen too often. Young college athletes, black males who have 4 or 5 years gone, and they're like clueless about what to do next.
Yep. And I think, honestly, the other side of this that doesn't really come up as much is it also fails the people that it's successful for. So when you're that person and you go one and done, and now you're a professional, now you enter into this whole world, and you got money now, or relatively at least, right? And you got money now, and so who knows when it might surface for you that this sport is taken from you, because ultimately one day it will be.
That's right. And what's the plan?
Right? So talk to me about mental health as you approach it in the Black Male Institute.
Oh, my goodness. We need to have a real long, hard, honest, sustained conversation about that, because one of my takes has been that we don't talk about mental health in the black community as much as I think we need to. And I think one of the reasons why we don't talk about it is because many of us don't think it's a real thing. Many of us have been socialized to think that mental health means something's wrong with you, that you're weak, that you're less than, that you're flawed. And then when you start to combine all the sort of the misnomers and misconceptions around mental health, combined with patriarchy and toxic masculinity, it's a bad combination for black men.
Very bad, right? And You may have known this book. Bell Hooks writes a book, We Real Cool, where she's analyzing black men. And she talks about us being caught at this crossroads of not having access to the things that patriarchy gives us because we're black men, and that being exclusively she has a term. I'm not thinking of it right now, but it's capitalistic white supremacist patriarchy, right? And so as black men, we don't have access to it, but we'll still get targeted by everybody who's fighting against it because of our maleness.
That's right.
And so we get caught at this crossroads, and we're wrapping up here a little bit, but in my work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator, right, for the upper school, I'm always thinking of how are we being more inclusive, more, ever inclusive, ever expanding to the diverse range that there is. But I feel like what gets lost is that intersection of black masculinity, where on some level, right, we need to be unapologetic about how we speak and prioritize blackness because everything else is built off of blackness. Right? So how do you navigate a conversation about what it is like to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive, where we almost lose sight of that conversation?
One of the things I do with my students is we engage in this exercise around unpacking our multiple identities. And I think we oftentimes use this term identity as if it's singular. And I have my students unpack the multiple identities that we all have. And I use myself as an example. I'm a black person, but I'm also a heterosexual male. I'm also a father. I'm also a husband. I'm also a son. I'm also a member of a fraternity. I'm also a professor. So all these different aspects of who I am, there's some parts of my identities where I have a lot of privilege. I'm able-bodied, right? I'm born in this country. English is my first and only language. So I understand those areas where I have privileges, but I also have some aspects of who I am where I'm subordinate status. Being a black person, right? Having grown up where I grew up, right? And so part of what I try to get my students to recognize is that there is no pure sense of one being completely privileged in all aspects of their lives or completely being oppressed in all aspects of their life. There's a whole lot of overlap there, right? And I think when we start to deal with the complexity and the overlapping of identities, then you start to begin to understand that, you know what, I may have more in common with you than I recognize, because I may not know what it means, how it feels to be black, but I'm a person who is undocumented, and I know that being undocumented feels different. And so then I have something in common with your struggle for being included, just like you have something in common with my struggle for being included. It's those kinds of conversations that I think are needed. And I think today's young people are thinking about those issues in a much more robust way than we did in previous generations. Because I watch the way young kids ride for, kids who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, which I think would never have happened a generation ago, right? I watch the way that kids ride for kids who have disabilities. Would have never happened a generation ago. I think younger kids are more quote unquote woke than we were in past generations. And that gives me hope, and that gives me optimism that we can be better.
For sure. And I love the comment about like almost looking past race to see something more. And I think a lot of times we collude race and culture, and it's a dangerous combination.
It is.
Because when I think culture, you need a food, a language, and a people, right? Black and white aren't cultures in and of themselves. In fact, they're a race that distance us from our culture of what it means to be American.
That's right.
In my mind.
That's right. Yeah. But I want to be clear though, because I still think race matters. I've written about this, but I think sometimes we are so fixated on race that we can't see the layers beneath that.
Right.
And I would love for us to get to a point where we're in a post-racial society. But until we deal with sort of the way in which racism plays itself out, we can't quite get there.
For sure. Always have to deal with the foundation
Absolutely.
first. Dr. Howard, thank you so much
my
for
man.
joining me. I think because of the work that you're committed to, it makes you royalty, and because of that, I wanted to just add value. Always trying to add value, so this is a special gift just for you. Target didn't have very manly bags this morning, but it is.
Come on now.
For anybody trying to get in touch with you, how would somebody follow Dr. Howard?
They would follow Dr. Howard on Twitter at Tyrone C Howard, HOWARD.
Awesome, and we're at blackroyalty.ed. Keep tapping in with us. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you.